So our first panel of the day is Stories from the Field, where we bring together 4 humanities PhDs in conversation about their respective fields. And the panel is moderated by Carolyn Schutten. Carolyn is currently a resident scholar at the UC Institute for U.S.-Mexico, and she will be a visiting fellow at the Center for U.S.-Mexican Studies at UC San Diego in 2018. She's a PhD candidate in the Department of History at UC Riverside, where she's writing her dissertation, Flow and Obstruction, Tijuana River, and Environmental Activism at the U.S.-Mexico border. With that said, Carolyn? Sure.
Good morning and welcome to Stories from the Field. This is an opportunity to talk with PhD humanists already at work. We hope that you will all engage with one another, and we invite questions at the end. We'll have a good a long time to discuss and ask questions. So we began a number of interesting conversations last night and hope to continue that dialogue today and throughout the day. But let me first briefly introduce each of our panelists. Magdalena Edwards earned her PhD in comparative literature at UCLA and her BA in social studies at Harvard. She wrote her undergraduate thesis on the Chilean poet Raúl Zurita and her doctoral dissertation on the North American poet Elizabeth Bishop. Magdalena is a writer, translator, actor, director, and producer based in Los Angeles. Her translation of Clarice Lispector's The Chandelier would be published, there I am, by New Directions in 2018. And she's working on her first book of poems with Rakesh Light Press. Her one-woman show, I Want to Be Robert De Niro, premiered at the Hollywood Fringe Festival in June 2017. She wrote and performed this piece. And she will be at Oxford this November to perform The Body Speaks at the After Clarice Lispector's Legacy Conference. She's also contributing editor to the Los Angeles Review of Books and founding member of the Collision Collective. Welcome. Maggie Gover, hopefully many of you know her, is the Director of Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate Division at UCR and a post-act career consultant with the professorsin.com. She has a PhD in English literature from UCR, a master's degree in English literature from the University of Oxford, and a dual degree in English literature and cinema studies from the University of California. While obtaining her various degrees, she worked administratively as an admissions intern at USC, Junior Dean of St. Hilda's College at Oxford, and as the Academic Preparation and Outreach Coordinator and the Graduate Student Mentorship Program Coordinator at UCR. Maggie also teaches Victorian literature and graduate level pedagogy courses. Toni Guglielmo is an art historian and educator with a passion for making museums accessible to wide audiences and fostering leadership, innovation, and diversity in the museum field. Her career bridges positions in both academia and museums and reflects her interest in combining history, theory, and practice. Toni is an associate director of the Getty Leadership Institute at Claremont Graduate University. She currently oversees the development of executive education programs for museum leaders from around the globe. Dr. Guglielmo has taught diverse audiences in online, museum, and college classrooms and currently teaches at Claremont Graduate University and Southern New Hampshire University. She received her BA from UCLA, an MA from Tufts, and a PhD from UC Santa Barbara. She's also associate editor for Curator at the Museum Journal. And David Palter is the senior associate for higher education and workforce development at Silicon Valley Leadership, a public policy nonprofit that represents 400 Silicon Valley employers. In this role, he collaborates with elected officials, education institutions, and leadership group member companies on issues and campaigns that affect the economic vitality and quality of life in Silicon Valley. David founded and directs the leadership group's Community College to Career Initiative, an active partnership between university and community college leaders to expand economic opportunity and increase diversity in the STEM workforce. David received his degree from USC, received an MA and PhD in history from UC Santa Cruz, and a BA in history from Oberlin College. Please join me in welcoming our panelists today. I realize those bios were robust, but hopefully you'll have a lot of questions later. The panelists, as you can tell, all come from a variety of backgrounds and experiences, and we've already begun a number of conversations which we hope to explore with you, including topics such as earning a living, the gig economy, what is the perceived value of the PhD, what does it mean to be a humanist, and many more things, as you know, around the table last night. Hopefully all of you had an opportunity to speak with one or more of the panelists and began thinking about some of these things. So first of all, I want to begin by asking you, what drew you to the PhD in the first place? How did your interests inform the skills and experiences that you acquired as a PhD? Maybe what are the skills and experiences you acquired throughout your trajectory thereafter? And just for fun, maybe you can talk a little bit about where you are in your career, new professional, how you find yourself, new professional, mid-career, or expert. You can start, anyone. And I invite you to all talk with each other as well.
I can start. Let's see, what drew me to the PhD? I don't know, really. I went directly from undergrad to my master's program, and then I went directly from master's to a PhD program. And I think the impetus for this was, first of all, I had a fellowship that kind of helped that along, but also because I really liked what I was doing as an undergraduate. I really liked reading, and I really liked writing and thinking about complex issues, and so I wanted to continue doing that. So I was really good at school, right? And I wanted to continue doing school, which is really funny because then you become a PhD student and you do school for like a year, and then you no longer are doing school and you're doing something completely different, right? And coming from a background where no one I knew had a PhD, I did not anticipate that, right? And that's one of the things, right? When you're a diverse student going to get your PhD, sometimes you're blindsided by things like, I thought it would just be more school, and it's not. But I really enjoyed what it was. I continued in my trajectory, right? And I continued reading and writing, and I had a cohort of people in my department who some of them really enjoyed being miserable in what they were doing. And I always felt like I was, pulling the wool over someone's eyes. Like, they're paying me to read novels that I like and then write about them with theory. Like, come on, people. Who's doing this, right? So I always felt like it was a really fun thing I was doing. There were moments, of course, in the dissertation writing that were frustrating and challenging, but I was never really disillusioned in what I was doing. And I always felt like it was something very pleasurable to be doing. And this is something that I hope for all of you. I want you to enjoy your PhD, right? What are the other questions that are involved in that question?
And so, what about life after the PhD?
Life after the PhD. So I am one of the very rare and lucky people I graduated on June 15th, and my job started on July 1st. So I had the job lined up, and I was ready to go, and I moved directly through. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I hustled throughout my PhD career, and even before that, with side jobs, and those side jobs had actually prepped me and made me ready for my career subsequently. Where am I now? I feel like I'm all of those things. I feel like I'm a career beginner, I'm mid-career, and I'm also an expert all at the same time, depending on what we're talking about and the context I'm in. So, yeah, that's how I feel about me. I do think that you never stop being a humanist, though. And I think that's really important to remember, that it doesn't matter what you're doing as your job, you're always bringing something different to the table, and the types of things that you think about and the ways that you think about them, and the complexities that you can see in issues that other people need to be, kind of brought to the table. You bring those, right? And you are inviting other people to think about things like, well, what is the access issue for diverse people, and how can we make this something that is equitable rather than equal, right? And those are types of conversations that it doesn't matter what industry you're in or where you are, if those are ingrained in you as a thinker and what you've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years, and it's totally okay if it's 7 years, you're fine. Those things are the things that you're always going to be thinking about. So even just the way I raise my child is really different now than it would have been had I not had a PhD. I'm a different person because I have different thought processes now.
Right. And so, what about you, David? What about your career trajectory? Did you have that job lined up the day after?
Right.
I wish all of that for all of you
Yes,
as well.
yes.
Well, I mean, take your first question first. My parents are jazz musicians, and we moved 35 to 40 times growing up. And I lived on both sides of the tracks, depending on whether they had a gig or not in that town, and grew up on food stamps. And I had friends with mansions, and I had friends where the whole family lived in the same room, and KFC. I would go, one night there'd be a family, and they had their own chef, and I could select from a menu in a family's home. And then the very next night, we'd be eating fried chicken with their whole family with a different set of friends. And I saw really early on that those differences were not arbitrarily defined, they were generally racially defined. And so I went to Oberlin, and then I wasn't satisfied with my own understanding of these deeply rooted structures of power after Oberlin, and I wasn't satisfied with my own ability to articulate them or to write about them. And so that's why I went to UC Santa Cruz. And I got to study labor history with Dana Frank, who's really fantastic on these issues. But I never went there specifically to become a professor, which is good because it's almost impossible anyway. So 20th century US history, it's like one tenure track position out of 500, 600 applications. So I always went there knowing that I'd want to work in public policy in some way, either for a nonprofit or for a government entity. And so what I didn't realize, and this addresses your last question, is what I needed to do, because this didn't exist. And I do want to say first, thank you for allowing me to be part of this amazing program. And it's just, I wish I had been there for the debt conversation, because the idea that someone who can think and write and create and frame the way that Kelly just did for this intro, that she is weighed down by debt, it's such a disservice to our society. That's not how you build a culture or a nation. And of course, a lot of us are in the same room, although I can't do what Kelly does. So no, I didn't have anything lined up, and it actually was my partner, Celine, who said, "Listen, you've applied to 50 jobs already. You're not getting anything back. You need to either translate better the competencies that you have for the field that you want to pursue, or get yourself some concrete skills that these people in HR understand." And so that's when and you'd see from my resume, that's when I volunteered on a campaign, a political campaign for an assembly member, and that's when I volunteered to be in the communications department at something called the Commonwealth Club. So at least then on my LinkedIn, I'd have communications and I'd have campaign work. And once I had those on top of the PhD, that helped the people reviewing my resume understand that I was willing to do actual work. There's this misconception out there that one of you have probably come across, that people don't think PhDs do actual work. We don't want to get our hands dirty. We're just opining about things all day. And I mean, opining is fantastic, but we do a lot of work, and we just have to be able to explain that to people. But you can't do it unless you're in the room. So for your resume, the first thing that they see, you really need to research the field that you want to go into and copy their language. So I was speaking with someone last night who does graduate student writing center mentoring. And who was that?
Patrick?
Yes, thank you. And can you remind me of your name again? Catherine, yes. So Catherine does that, and then I suggested, instead of on the LinkedIn profile having mentoring or peer mentoring, which is a school word, academic word, if she wanted to apply to the corporate world or the nonprofit world, she would have something like professional development consultant on there. It's just about, because mentoring, right, it's just about really looking into the field that you want to get into and borrowing that language. But no, for me, I didn't have the job lined up. There was a lot of tears, a lot of punching through walls, all of that, and a lot of hard work to get there. But we're used to that, right? We're writing the dissertation, so.
Maybe we can talk with Toni. Your trajectory was a little bit different because you were working before you went to the PhD?
Yeah, exactly. And before I tell you a little bit about that, I also want to thank Carolyn and Kelly and the Humanists at Work program for being here today. It's really my privilege to be here among you, so thank you. Unlike Maggie, what Maggie was describing, how she went straight through in her trajectory, I had a BA in art history from UCLA and an MA in art history and museum studies from Tufts University. And I had always wanted to work in museums, And so when I completed my master's degree, I found a museum job, came back to LA and launched my career in the museum field, and was in the field for about 10 years before I decided to go back for a PhD in 2002. And I had I'd been very fortunate to work on a lot of innovative startup museum projects in LA, and by the time that I decided to go back for a PhD, I'd seen a lot of ups and downs, two very well-funded programs that I was on, one with the Milk and Family Foundation, which was the Museum of Creativity, that I worked on for 4 years, and one that was at the Getty Education Institute for the Arts. So these are like very well-funded projects, but neither of them came to fruition. And of course I took that very hard because I was at the beginning of my career and very idealistic, and we had blue sky opportunities, and I was talking to like billionaires in the room about how to create the next big change in the field. And then after I sort of recovered from all of that, I decided I really wanted to go back to school because I had also reached the limits. I felt like I'd reached the limits of my knowledge and what I had gotten from my master's degree and having worked with senior scholars and top museum professionals. And I realized I didn't have enough theory and research. And so I went into the doctoral program with the idea that maybe it's not going to help me get a better job, but it's going to be a personal investment. And I thought if I don't do it now, and I was sort of in my mid-30s, if I don't do it now, that window of opportunity is going to pass. So I decided, like, in a long-term investment, I don't know what I'm going to be doing 20 years down the road, but it would be something, and it is something that we always have. I mean, this investment in our education is something that no one ever takes away from you, and you always have it in your pocket, and you're always adding to that body of research. No matter where your career goes. So that's been my trajectory, and I really wanted to inform myself with theory and research so that and history, so that I could actually go back in the field and see how theory and history can improve museum practices.
It's a really good point about thinking about your body of work, right? Mm-hmm. As a whole, right?
Yes, definitely.
And so, speaking of thinking creatively and punching through walls and just doing everything.
Yeah. It's so great to be here to hear everybody's perspective. I graduated from college in '99. The economy was booming. There were jobs everywhere. And I decided to move to South America to find my roots. And my father's face fell, like, why did I just support you through this whole university education for you to go to Chile, where you were born, the country we left, to go work in some crappy job where you're not going to be paid anything? And that's what I needed to do. While I was there for 2 years, I worked in a high school, in an international high school, as an ESL teacher. I felt very proud and scrappy to get that job on my own terms. Chile is a pretty small country, and everyone kind of knows each other. So the automatic thing would have been for me to talk to my parents and have one of their friends who lives there hook me up. And I said, no, I want to get my own job. Well, I was thrown to the wolves. I was hired in a malicious way as a Chilean and paid in the Chilean currency, even though I also had a US passport. All of these horrible, tricky things happened to me. It was a very big learning experience. But I also made really good friends. And during that year, already I had to make a change. The school didn't like me. I spoke up too much. I was unruly. So after that, I worked as a journalist for a year in Chile, which I loved. And I worked in a newsroom, when newsrooms, I guess, still existed. And I loved writing. I loved interviewing people. I loved writing reviews of films and books. And I thought to myself, well, what next? How can I keep doing this sort of thing? And I decided to apply for a PhD in literature, in English originally, even though my undergrad was in social studies, social science. And I didn't understand at that time that no English department would take me seriously in some ways, because I didn't have an English undergrad degree. And so diving into my PhD, I was already kind of not lining myself up in the traditional way. I ended up in a comp lit department, which was amazing at UCLA. I started my PhD in 2001, just a few weeks after 9/11. It was a really interesting, difficult time. And despite all of that, we still lived in a fairly robust economy. By the time I finished, things had changed. And then the global economy imploded, and when I was a lecturer for a year, everything was shifting, you know? I've just been thinking about those sort of bookends in that kind of context, economic context, because I think you guys are also in a very particular economic context. Probably when I was finishing college, we were starting to talk a lot about how people wouldn't have one job their whole life. Now, obviously, no one's going to have one job their whole life. You know, all of us are going to be reinventing ourselves. So I would say my PhD experience was not pleasurable, unfortunately. I was very, there were moments of pleasure, but I was also jostling and had friction, and was, dissatisfaction is something that I felt too. I didn't feel like I fit. I wasn't sure what I was doing there. You know, now I look back and I'm so grateful for the experience and for sticking it out, because once you've earned your degree, whatever that degree is, that's yours. No one can take it from you. And it's up to you to turn it into whatever you want to make it in your next step. And if you've done a dissertation project, you've mastered that topic, and you've written about it the way you want to write about it. And you've been in the room with your committee, and they've given you feedback, and you've said, oh, that's great feedback, or you've said, I don't know if I'm going to take that feedback. And that's an amazing experience, you know, as a mind to go through. So I think I need you to help me ground now what I should say next.
No, actually, you've opened it up beautifully for kind of this. And many of you are talking about this, and we talked a little bit about this last night. You know, to what degree, and you've already started talking about this, has taking initiative, finding new skills, and you know what I've discovered yesterday. You know, this entrepreneurial mindset might be a good word or a dirty word. I'm not sure, but I want to talk about it. How has that played a role in your career? And maybe you can comment on how, you know, the skills that you learned as a PhD, you know, how those played out, how those morphed into the career that you have today.
Start again? All right. I'll start, that's fine. So for some of you who were sitting at dinner with me last night, this will be a little bit repetitive, but I think the skills that we have as PhDs really do translate into real-world experiences. One thing that I find is workflow management. We are really good workflow managers, and that's because when you're doing a dissertation and you're having to do the research and you're also having to write fellowship applications and job applications and teach and grade, and you're probably also, you know, putting on some conference and maybe getting some tutoring work on the side, and whatever you're doing a ton of different things, and you have to think about, you know, where is my energy best spent and what has to come first before I can do this other thing, and all of that is workflow management. And when you get into a job or a career, a lot of workflow management, especially when you get into a supervisory position, that's what your life becomes, a lot of workflow management. Managing competing deadlines, you can all do, and you all do successfully. If you have your PhD, you definitely know how to do that, right? Of course, the communicating aspects, right? The writing, reading, critically writing. Some of us write fast, some of us read fast. I am not a fast reader, but being able to read critically and being able to write diplomatically is very important. But I think one of the things that I gravitate towards the most, and the reason I like to hire PhDs, is the thing that's hardest to talk about on a resume and a cover letter, and that's the problem-solving, critical thinking type of skills, right? So I hire purposefully PhDs because I don't want to have to tell people what I want them to do and have them just do what I want them to do. If I were to do that, I could hire people at a much lower level, right? And that's fine. But I want to hire PhDs because I want to give them kind of an idea of where we're going, the big picture, and then I want them to push back at me. I want them to come back with ideas of how to attain the big picture. I want them to have some sort of thought process, and they will do the research, right? If we have a problem, I have 2 full-time staff coordinators, and these two women will come to me with like, okay, so this is the problem. These are the 19 things I researched, and here are the 3 solutions in ranked order of how I think we should move forward, right? And that's different than when you hire a BA straight out of undergrad, right? You're not going to get that from them. And that's what I want. I want people who are thinkers. I don't just want workers. And so I think that's the real thing that you can offer as a PhD. And it's very difficult to tell people and to show people until you're working, and then everyone who hires a PhD is like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So once you're working, then everyone's going to love you, and except for maybe the people who you start working with and then you suddenly are their supervisor very quickly. That happens to a lot of our graduates, right? They start as an unpaid intern someplace, and then they're hired as the supervisor of the whole area that they were interning at. So, and we've seen that with several of our PhD graduates. So these are things that happen, and they can happen for you.
But I think translating what you guys already know how to do,
Yeah.
I think that was a great thing that you said about putting in your LinkedIn professional development consultant. And I would say for the person who works, if I understand the job correctly, is helping grad students apply for things and write essays, fellowships, to also put writing consultant, you know, which may sound redundant, but cover more bases. I think that having also side jobs as you're doing your PhD, while it can be stressful, like I had to come up with my funding every year. I didn't have a package, which at the time was really stressful. It always worked out, but it got me used to having to go from one thing to the next and have that flexibility. You know, I think you're right that we are thinkers, and we can really arrive on the scene, kind of fit ourselves into what's happening, ask questions, and help find solutions.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on, I totally agree, and I wanted to pick up on what Carolyn mentioned, or we were kind of talking about reinventing yourself and not being in one job, or envisioning that you're going to be in one job for the next like 30 years because the economy is changing and the job structures are changing, and so it's really hard to find those positions and what that means. What it meant for me is when I finished my PhD, I didn't have a lot of patience for doing the fellowship track and trying to apply for small grants, and I knew I was employable because I had been in the workforce. So I went right back into the workforce, and I wanted to finish my doctorate, but I also saw the changing economy at that time, and it was 2006 or to 2008, and that need to really highlight your transferable skills. So I think that idea of having, and I'm going to say personal branding, I know that's possibly also controversial, but really self-promoting, because we don't tend to think that we need to do that, or we're experts, or, you know, it's not really, like it's more of a business-minded approach in the business sector, but really being able to be fluid and to know what your skills are. We have all of these academic skills, research and critical thinking and problem solving, but then looking at how those apply as transferable skills, and just kind of making sure that you're setting yourself up to be recognized as someone who takes agency and you're not always waiting for those opportunities. So you find a mentor, you create a blog, you create a website, you're putting your publications up there, trying to do like a TED Talk, you know, just things that really help establish yourself as an expert. And for me on the job market, I kind of tended to think around the skills that I would bring. So I really like research, teaching, writing, educating, like a lot of us do, and have my own personal mission that has guided my career. So when I am looking for a particular job and have had to move around a little bit, I'm looking at what I can bring to that position, and is there a way for me to feel like I'm accomplishing my personal mission that's at the individual level that aligns with the organization or the field. And so I'm not looking for one particular job like the tenure track job or a particular institution, but how I can bring those skills and my personal mission, and does it fit? And then I don't know how long I'll stay there. until it sort of doesn't fit anymore, or I've accomplished that mission. So that's kind of how I've guided myself through that.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Kind of. And one thing that I see people doing a lot, PhD, because I work with PhD graduate students all the time, right, is kind of selling themselves short and going after jobs that are way below the level that you should be applying to, right? And I've heard some of that over in that sector of the room.
We're all nodding up there, yes.
But yeah, and so I think one of the things that I kind of want to pick up here is that you're recognizing the skills that you have in yourself, and you're setting yourself up for kind of higher level jobs where you're going to be able to do this type of change and the type of thinking that you're doing. And you need certain skills to be able to get those jobs. And so there are 3 skills that you should all have by the time you finish your PhD. One is managing a budget, a real budget, not your like, I live on a graduate student budget, so I know how it is to like make ends meet. Like, no, that's not a good answer in an interview. Have a budget that you've worked with, right? If you've done a symposium or you've done some sort of, whatever, it doesn't matter. Everyone who's hiring you wants to know that you can work within a budget. Have some sort of supervisory experience of other people. This is really important if you go into any sort of management level. They're going to want to know that you've supervised other people at some point. And the third thing is that all industries are deploying new technologies all the time, new platforms, new information systems, and they want to know that you can easily implement the newest system that comes along. So I have a friend who works in digital marketing for Sony Pictures, and in the last 6 years, they've implemented 6 different production tools. Right? Every year they're like, oh, we're not using that one anymore. Now we're using this one, right? And she's like, okay, figure that one out, right? And that's like a faster moving industry. I work in education, which is a super slow moving industry. I mean, we're still using Blackboard, right? And even I have had to learn 3 new tools since I started 6 years ago, right? So it's really important that you're the person that's not gonna need like a super ton of training and like hand holding, that you're like, no, I got this. I can do new information systems. I can do new digital platforms easily.
Right, because we're PhDs, we know how to research stuff, right?
Yeah.
Figure it out. Yeah.
I would also say that coming from a newspaper background, and then I was a editor at the LA Review of Books for a couple years. I co-founded a section there called Around the World, and I'm a contributing editor now. There are a lot of opportunities to get your writing out there that don't have to be peer-reviewed academic journal articles. If you're somebody who's thinking about wanting to do, covering your bases, so you'd really maybe many of you would like to try to get a tenure track job or some sort of academic job, then you may also want to have your writing out there. You may love writing. You may love the topic you're writing your dissertation on. I think that pitching essays or reviews or articles that can be really fun and probably very easy for most of you to write, because you're all strong writers who can get it done, for a place like the LA Review of Books or the Millions, or start your own blog if there's something that you really want to write about. Self-publish your own pieces on Medium. The piece that I wrote thus far that's been most read is a piece I wrote on Prince when he died on his third to last album, and I published it on Medium. And just a few years ago, I would have said to you, no, never self-publish. You know, I have a very snooty background from academia and literary publishing. You can't do that. I totally disagree now. So if there's something you love writing about, put it out there. And then if you go on a job interview that is perhaps a hybrid type of job, or an academic job, or a non-academic job, and you can say, I've kept this blog on my favorite restaurants in the neighborhood, or whatever your topic is, and that impresses people. And they also, in that way, get to hear your voice as a writer and as a thinker. And I think if I had done that as a grad student, perhaps I would have had a greater sense of pleasure and of opening, and a greater sense of space where I could kind of put some of my just energy. Because I think a lot of the time during my program, I felt like I had to pass as a serious academic. And I had to sort of not talk about any of these things that we're talking about now. And just to echo what people have already said, you know, this didn't exist, and I'm so glad it does.
I want to bring David into this conversation about, back up a little bit and talk a little bit about this idea of thinking about yourself and your personal brand and business versus
humanist, if there is a versus, right? I wanted to see what you thought about that.
Well, one, I just so wish this had been around when I was in school. These are all such perfect, concrete ideas. I wanted to add to your list of three things that we already also can talk about when we go into interviews. And some of you in your 7th year, you're already thinking about that. One, if you have your PhD, you know generally how to teach, which means you can communicate complex ideas and clearly and concisely to an audience that may or may not be on their cell phone, and you can be engaging. 2, you know how to manage up. Most of you have advisors, and so you've worked on that process. And 3, there was one more, the EPA, the Energy Department. There's one more. No, the third one is that the budgets are really important. But I'm so sorry, there was one last one. But I know what you were trying to get me to talk about. I gotta say, I'm really sorry. She had an original question that she circulated about entrepreneurship, and I very gently pushed back. Because words like entrepreneurship and branding and the gig economy, for me, I was trying to figure out why I'm uncomfortable with them, even though I'm the one who's working for a corporate lobbyist group in Silicon Valley. For me, they're too deeply embedded in the very same neoliberal project that's exerting downward pressure on all of our programs to increase class sizes and decrease tenure-track positions. And so, to whatever extent our use of those terms legitimizes that project, I'm uncomfortable with it. I am very comfortable with the DIY notion, right? And the idea about being creative and being a self-starter in your own career. As I said, I wasn't a self-starter, I was a wife-prompted starter. And there were ultimatums, I won't go into it. But taking on new things and saying to yourself, you know, this PhD just, I know what it has given me, but it did not set me up for success in the eyes of others, especially the HR professionals who may be reviewing your resumes. Go into other fields, get experience in communications, get experience in campaign work if you want to do public policy. I wish I could remember that third thing. It wasn't the Energy Department.
It'll come to you.
There was,
Yeah. While you're thinking about it, I know you gave 3 really interesting bits of tips in terms of where you work in the workplace that you work. Do you remember last night you were talking about FIT?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I can share that.
Yes.
So I run executive education programs for museum leaders from around the globe. They come for 2 weeks online and 2 weeks in residency, and as part of the residency, we take them, around museums, and we visit the Getty and see Jim Cuno, who is the president of the trust there. And he shares a little bit about his leadership trajectory. He started out as an art historian and then became a professor and then a director of the museum and then director of the trust. So, and raising a family and moving around the country to pursue jobs. But when he speaks to them about their next step, and a lot of them want to go from being a director of a small museum to a larger museum, or for being VP to a director, or curator to a director, he shares with them 3 criteria. And he says that whenever he's been confronted with an opportunity, he assesses the opportunity based on these 3 criteria. You have to like the people that you're working with, you have to like the work that you do, and you have to like the lifestyle that the job gives you. And if you have all 3 of those, it's a definite yes. If you have 2 of those, you can make the job work. But if you only have 1, it's not going to work. So it was like, everyone's mind is blown because he's, brilliant and an art historian and an academic. He has all these transferable skills that lets him run a $1 billion trust. And it was like, really? That's it? Just those 3 things, and it all comes down to, just how does it fit on these very basic levels that are going to keep you happy? So that's, I think, what you were wanting me to share. So yeah, it's a nice framework. I keep it in mind.
that last thing, sorry.
I knew you'd think of it.
Grant writers, you can immediately apply for grant writing and fundraising positions. If you don't already know this, know this. So I've been talking, whether you're in musicology or philosophy, you can do this already. And don't think that grant writing is just definitely a narrow or stilted profession. If you're in a nonprofit, say, that allows you to have some latitude and allows you to be creative about the grant writing process, you are also going to be at the same time developing the program that you're writing the grant for. You have all the power as a grant writer. So you can go back to the people who have an idea of the program and say, hey, don't you think it would be useful to engage with the local K through 12 schools on this? Don't you think if you're trying to aim for diversity, you should do this, 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 and this? And very likely they won't have thought about that, and they'll say, oh boy, yeah, okay, let's do that. You can all apply to fundraising, grant writing positions like immediately. So if you're worried, there's one possible position.
And I want to just elaborate a little bit on this because in conversations last night and with Toni, we talked about how we can have impact at the at the individual level, within the organization and within the larger field that you're in, even if it's multiple fields, right? And I wanted to see if any of you want to speak to that. Those are different spaces, and how do you kind of shape change, as you just indicated? How do you go about doing that, either at the individual level within your workplace, whatever that might be, or maybe as a larger community effort, as David sort of pointed to?
To affect change in terms of being a humanist, or yeah. I mean, I think when I have conversations with people, and I work with all different kinds of people, I often will get this pause, and then the person will say to me, you ask these really great questions. And we're all good askers of questions.
I have a lot. I have a lot here.
And I think that for me, to be true to my sense of curiosity and inquiry and the critical thinking, the methodologies of analysis that you learn as a doctoral student, that is something that I have with me every single day. And I think that I often, if I'm in a professional setting that isn't hybrid or academic, I don't particularly bring up the PhD part. And sometimes that's just a happy surprise that kind of unfolds. And then the person will say, oh, wow, you did that. That's really interesting. And it's almost like spreading the good news without people knowing. Because I do think there is that sense that doctoral students are, or PhDs are, in the ivory tower opining, and that we're completely out of touch with reality, and that we have these sort of gilded lives. And everything that we've talked about so far today really is the opposite. We're scrappy, everything's shifting, we've all entered into a framework for professional life that's disappearing before our eyes. So I think that for me it's conversations and asking questions.
Anyone else want to speak to that?
Sure. I'll add a little bit. I think that when you're assessing an opportunity, it's good to not conflate those things, but to kind of keep them as three different streams. That individual level, we've offered some ideas about, do it yourself and taking agency and not waiting for opportunities and marketing your transferable skills. Jim Cuno's framework for how to assess. Those are ideas at the individual level when you see an opportunity, and is it going to make you happy, and does it fit with your skills? And then there's the organizational level, which is really what's the mission of that organization, and does it align with what I'm interested in? And the field level I think of is more of how can I push this field forward? How can we make these big changes, that we're talking about in terms of the way the economy is shifting and what that means for humanists and what that means for the university and those research problems and those theoretical problems. So it's kind of good to keep them separate because you may not be able to get to that field level right away, but hopefully you're getting the individual and the organizational level, and you're doing some of that field work on the side, maybe writing and putting out your own blog, and it's through these other opportunities or the networks that you're creating where you get invited to be on a panel or to be a guest editor. So those are opportunities that you can start pushing at the higher level. So it's actually something that we teach at the leadership program. We have, when executives are mapping out their leadership plan, we have, your individual skills, your own leadership development plan, your organization and how you can work in your organization to maximize your team and the mission, and then the field, and where you are as a thought leader in the field. And that point of intersection in the middle of those three circles is where you find sort of your strength and your position. And I think it's important to have a personal mission for all of us in terms of what's driving you, and to know that as your identity. And I wanted to add something, which is the flip side of this, and I wasn't going to venture down this path because I'm much more on the gig economy and the personal branding and using those skills because I feel like it's the flow. But something that Maggie mentioned, and I know both of you, and especially David, have been talking about this, is not to sell yourself short, because you don't get so focused on finding that job because you're feeling you need health benefits, and you need the stability, and you need the job. Yes, you need those things, but to really see what you're bringing, and you've spent all this time doing research and solving your problem. That's very important historically and in contemporary society. And just really finding also in that equation, are they going to value what you're bringing? Because you are bringing a lot in terms of those higher level skills in the work of a humanist, and you want to position yourself in that place of strength, that you can do these basic skills of the job, but you're also going to bring something more. You're going to bring this innovation and these ideas and this critical problem solving and this bigger world view. And that's what's really unique about being a PhD in the workforce. You're not just at that level, you have something more. So to be sure to bring that too, and not just be focused on landing the job, for instance.
It was just great hearing you say that. And part of the reason that I wanted to speak with all of you was this idea that, we are experts in our field already when we finish, and we want to shape some kind of change. And I wanted, Maggie, to give you an opportunity to speak to this, especially since you work at training, PhDs and beyond. How do you feel there might be changes? I want to segue into thinking about how humanists and move things forward.
Well, I think we have a very unique perspective as humanists, right? Because humans live a short time, but as humanists, we're looking at how humans have lived over a long time, right? So one of the things that I push back on is this notion of change and how different things are. In the gig economy, it's totally different, and we're never going to be the same again, right? And a lot of that's really alarmist, and it's coming out of sectors where they don't do a lot of historical, let's look at other things. So I've done with undergraduates, with graduate students at a professional literature conference, and with university administrators. I've done the same thing where I have two quotes about a new media, and I ask them to identify what the new media is, right? And one of them is about how this new media means that it's very dangerous because people aren't speaking to each other anymore, and there's no face-to-face interaction, and what does that mean for us as humans in moving forward? And the other is the vulnerability that when you put pictures of yourself up, that you no longer are a self, and other people can impose their ideas on you, and never imagine that your picture is a private thing, right? And so people always think it's Twitter and Facebook. And ironically, one's about the telegraph, and one's about photography, the first photographs, right? And so, but they're the same things that we're telling our students today. And so, yes, this technology is changing, but the way humans are interacting with technology, the same stories are told, and over and over and over again, and you can see them with the history of technology when you've done history of media work like I have, right? You can see that. And so you can bring a historical perspective to what sometimes is an alarmist conversation, right? And that can help. In the university context, I think that what I do is I offer support services for graduate students to help graduate students meet deadlines, meet their mental health challenges, right? Overcome those, get through their PhD, hopefully thriving rather than just muddling through and feeling like you have to fit yourself in different places, right? We don't want that. We want our PhDs to feel like they can be who they are and be successful as who they are. You're managing multiple frameworks of self, and we want you to be able to be successful. doing that without having to sacrifice who you were for who you were going to be, right? So that is what I was hired to do. So I have like a really very tangible relationship with change because I was hired to make change, right? That's like my actual purpose at the university. But I don't think it goes far enough, right? The university itself is sanctioning this because they hired me and they give me a sizable budget to do these things, yay. But that it hasn't filtered into departments yet. So there are still departments who have antiquated, weird requirements, right? So when I was doing my PhD, and tell me if this sounds like your qualifying exams, that replicate nothing that you will ever have to do in the real world, whether or not you're a tenure-track professor or, you know, anything. Like there's who sits in a room with no sources and has to produce a 20-page essay in 3 hours? Like that doesn't make sense. When will I ever be doing this, right? And so I think that the actual, right, does that sound like?
We're all knowingly chuckling.
In fact, we tell our students not to do that, right? Like, oh my gosh, you're a bad student if you're waiting till the last minute and you don't have your sources out and you're writing a paper really fast. Okay, now PhD candidate, that's what I want you to do. What? It doesn't make sense, right? And are these hoops that we're jumping through, or are they approximating some sort of skill that we want you to have? And so I think that, well, the university, you know, my university at least, I can't speak to others, but the university is very supportive of PhDs and humanist PhDs looking elsewhere for work. And we're doing that by having me and having my programs. I still think there's more work to be done at the department level, right, where the requirements aren't arbitrary, where the requirements can help you. But I kind of want to push back against that too, though, because it's not a trade school, right? And you don't want all the requirements of the degree to be a trade degree, because then you're losing some of the beauty of the humanities, right? You want to sit and think about these deep thoughts and topics, and that's not necessarily going to be something that is a line on your CV, right, or a line on your resume. So while I want that change, I also want to kind of push back against that change.
Well, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because I, in advance of today, wrote a little post on Medium called The PhD Hustle Part 1. And I put it on my Facebook, and I put it on Twitter, and I put it on my Instagram, and I tagged people I know who I did my doctoral program with. What do you think? And I said, if you have comments, put them here, or you can PM me. And I got both. I got one friend who I went to grad school with who wrote a super long post that I want to incorporate into the original thing, because he talked about engines of enthusiasm. He's an associate professor at a university in Tokyo. He's a total hybrid, and yet he's sort of been able to be within the university system. Then I had other people who work now in software engineering and other things make comments. And then I had a couple of people PM me, and they said, I can't put my comment on Facebook because I don't want my colleagues at the senior level to see it. So it's an associate professor at a university I can't name. Or, you know, I'm a graduate student at this level or whatever. But the graduate student said to me a really interesting thing. She said, I don't want to tax my professors in my department with more things for them to do for me. They're already doing so much. It sounds like she has amazing mentors, but you know, they're helping me with my writing. They're writing letters of recommendation. They're helping me with my job interview strategy.
Wow.
You know, all of these things. You know, to also ask them to help me think about my strategies for getting a job in the real world if I don't go into academia. Right. And also, they don't know anything about that.
Yes.
So they can't help me. She said, but at my institution, there's an amazing graduate center. And I go there, and there's several people there dedicated to helping us, and I get so many resources there. So I thought that was a really interesting point that she made that I think fits with what you're talking about, which is, in a way, be flexible, and perhaps there are some hoops that are a little bit out of touch with the contemporary moment when you're doing your qualifying exams or so on, but take them as that. And when you go into the workforce, whether you're a tenure-track professor or in a corporation or in a nonprofit, you will always have hoops that are sort of absurd that you have to kind of get through. I mean, that's part of the nature of work. But also find that other set of resources if it's not your actual professors. If your department is a little bit old-fashioned or what have you. It sounds like now in many campuses, and certainly at the UCs, there are places to go to get that information.
I wanted to ask, do I have time for one more question? Yes? So I wanted to get back to this idea of, how do we continue to be humanists in this non-academic work? How do we continue to explore what we loved about our PhD? And David, I want to hear your thoughts on this especially. How can we, maybe find ways to collaborate and continue that work that we love? And because being a humanist isn't just any old thing, right? It isn't a business degree that we're earning. It is something else. And how do we contribute to that? And I think we talked a little bit about how we might shift the way the PhD is pursued, but just thinking about humanist and non-academic work, and how do we keep it alive? How do we stay connected and keep that passion for why we came to the PhD in the first place?
So whether you are in prison studies or philosophy, it seems to me you're asking questions about power and narrative, and I think there is space in a wide array of industries. Strange. To ask those same questions. I mean, I work in, as my advisor said it when I got the job, the belly of the beast in Silicon Valley. But yet, the people that I work with, I'm going to have a meeting with SAP tomorrow when I get back there, and then on Thursday, a meeting at Facebook. The people that I meet in these corporations, in general, are good people who want to do good things, who talk about the two Silicon Valleys and wanting to bridge the two Silicon Valleys, and they're looking for creative ideas to do it. And they're looking for the right sort of arguments with data and with narrative that they can bring to their own managers to convince them. And they're going to be looking for people like you who can give that to them, who already just know, like, everything that you do is about data and critical argument structure and a story on top of that. That's something that we humanists can bring that some of my friends in social science are not quite as good at, although things have changed, right? Boundaries are shifting. But that's really useful. And my ability, so one thing I did want to say before we lose our time here is that part of, and this was an article that you sent, and I'm really thankful for that as well, part of what academia also teaches us is to demur on something until we're an expert. And so, not because of anything that I've done, but because of the stature of the organization for which I now work, I've been asked in the year and a half that I've worked there to be on 3 panels and to give 2 legislative testimonies. And up until very recently, I said no every single time because, who the hell am I? I can't do that. That's for an expert. Whereas everyone around me who's also been in their field like a year, they felt fine. They were moderating panels on AV technology in San Francisco. They were talking about things that they had just recently learned about. And I think part of it's maybe me, but part of it's also because, right, we are bred to believe, Lord, we are inculcated with the notion that we can't really speak to anything until we've published or taught several classes on it at the undergrad level. But this is part of that transition in this new economy, and I don't know, I guess I'm uncomfortable calling it branding, but being confident about the abilities, Maggie, you spoke to this, being confident about the abilities that you do have, and the fact that maybe other people might want to hear what you have to say, and it might be useful. That's all I could add.
No, that's great. I wanted to just pick up on that last point that you made, which is really that self-advocacy, because I totally understand what you're saying. I've been in, meetings and forums, and someone will say something that is, just a very big 10 o'clock idea very flippantly, and I'll be like, that's an argument. You can't just say that. So also I felt like that, from what expertise are you saying this? It needs to be broken down. Yeah, so, but it's actually, to go back to a question that Carolyn raised earlier, I think, you're an expert once you get your degree, even if you're early career. So, to speak up, because you are able, even if it's not in a specific discipline or you're in an interdisciplinary situation, to own that expertise. And, to have a little patience when people who haven't gone through such a rigorous process are flippantly putting things out there, you can kind of temper the situation and decide, should I interject or just let them have their say and kind of bring something else? But definitely understand that point. I wanted to get back to Carolyn's point about how to continue to be humanists in sort of the shifting or non-academic setting. And I would say that, personally, I haven't solved that problem. So I work at an institution with the Getty, which gives me an immense platform for being able to create change on that field level that we were talking about, and even the organization. I'm aligned with its mission to foster thought leadership and to have opportunities to be thinking about ways to connect the field and field-wide mentoring, thought leadership platforms, ideas that can critically move the field forward, and training leaders who will go out and make those changes. So for me, that's very rewarding at that sort of organizational field-wide level that I was talking about. But personally, as a humanist, I'm an administrator mostly. So, and I don't actually like it very much. I can do it because I've had a lot of experience in the field, project management, budgets, knowing how to run a meeting, set an agenda, all of that. But it's, it feels like sometimes just this, like eating a big meal and not being satisfied. It feels like a lot of production work sometimes, and I just I don't want to do it. There's all this administrative, hiring faculty and contracts and stuff. So I don't have a solution, but what I've done personally is I do a lot of other things on the side. So I am associate editor for Curator, the museum journal, and if any of you want to write about an exhibition review, please see me, because I'm always soliciting. And I teach on the side. I teach at Claremont Graduate University. I teach online. I'll take opportunities to teach at the museum. I sit on review panels. I do things that connect me back to art and my passion, because I'm also in a weird position where I'm not in the museum field, so I'm not in a museum. I miss dealing with the objects and the audience, and I'm in a university, but I'm not a faculty. I'm a staff. So I'm neither here nor there. And it's probably right for right now, but the reason I said that I haven't solved how to continue being a humanist is because I've taken on all these other things, and I'm very busy. So I'm and I haven't written the book that I wanted to write my dissertation into a book, so that writing of this book project has slipped. And I've made a commitment now to negotiate time off from work so that I can do my personal development and my own research, and luckily I'm in a context where that is supported and recognized. So it took me a little while to get there, to get the organization under my belt where I could negotiate for something like that. So that's sort of my my sort of solution, to just try, if you're not finding that that ability to be a humanist or that ability to connect with your passion directly, to just maybe balance it, and then in the bigger picture try to have work-life balance.
I think you bring up a really good point about this idea of thought leadership, and that many of us as PhDs, we are experts already in our field. You have to hear that many times today, hopefully, or think about that, and that it translates really easily, I think, into leadership or management or something of that nature. I don't know if any of you want to comment on that.
I actually wanted to pick up on what you were saying about finding things that make you happy as a humanist. And at the Graduate Careers Consortium conference, this last one that we went to in spring, they had a speaker who came in and talked about happiness in the job, right? And what does happiness look like, and recontextualized it as having purpose, and that the purpose that you have does not necessarily have to be from your 9 to 5, if you have a 9 to 5 job. It just has to be from some place. You have to have some sort of purpose in order to be a fulfilled, happy human being, right? But where you find your purpose can vary. And some of the happiest people, are finding their purpose because they're filling a need that they see in society. So this is like, there was like 8 seasons of a show called Dirty Jobs where people were doing horrifying work that would make some people feel sick, right? But the people who the host interacted with every time, were generally really happy, satisfied people. And it wasn't because they really loved, cleaning out sewers, but because they found purpose in what they were doing. And I think that that's really important for us as humanists, is to find our purpose, and where is our purpose, and how do we identify our purpose, and how do we balance the work that we're doing to find our purpose with the work that we're doing to pay the bills. And I think those are all questions that we have to negotiate for ourselves.
Thank you. I do want to give plenty of time for questions. Did you have any last thoughts, or do you want to just ready to go? So I welcome you all to engage in, there are many things we've thrown out here today, so please, we welcome your questions, comments.